I know we're not supposed to judge books by their cover, but after just one game, we've already learned a bit about the Oilers' new faces.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Friday edition of Locked On Oilers. I am your host, Nick Zararis. This is my fourth NHL season as a host here on the Locked On Podcast Network, and I want to thank everyone that is making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers is a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where we've got your team covered every single day. And today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, where you, as a new FanDuel customer, can win up to $300 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Go visit FanDuel.com to download the app. So, on today's Friday edition of Locked On Oilers, we're going to break down the new faces to the lineup, and we're using that a little liberally. Yes, we're going to talk about Noah Philp, who didn't play all that much last year, but I would consider as a newer face. It will hit Alec Regula, and we'll focus mostly on Savoy, Ike Howard, and go from there. But to start out, and I really want to emphasize this, we have one game. The Edmonton Oilers have played 1 out of 82, and we're going to go to the handy-dandy Locked On Oilers calculator, if I can find it, in my drawer over here. And I don't even see it. Oh, there it is. No, it's not. That's my power cord. Okay. This is terrible radio. I am not grabbing my calculator. At least I don't think I am, because I didn't see it there, and I don't want to go digging around on air, because as funny as that might be, the thought of that, I also understand that your time is valuable, your time is precious, so I'm not going to waste it by doing math, but at the very least, that's why, because it's on my desk. Wow, this is some absolutely compelling radio. So 1 divided by 82, that's 0.012% of the Oilers season has been played so far. And within that 0.012 of the Oilers season, each player we're going to talk about is playing an even smaller segment of that percentage. So I want to preface this entire episode by talking about what is actionable, what is realistic, and what isn't. The most baseline, general, simple barometer for player performance in the NHL are counting stats, goals, assists. Those are clear. They are straightforward. There is no ambiguity. Now, we can use context. We can try and understand how realistic those numbers are, how sustainable they are, but they are a snapshot in efficiency, in performance. If you look at a player and see they produce 95 points, okay, you have an understanding this is a pretty good player. There are maybe 15, 20 guys in the whole league who are capable of reaching that threshold. If we're talking about a 30 or a 40-point player, then our conversation becomes a bit more nuanced. We talk about how they got there. How many minutes do they play? Do they play on the power play? Or are they mostly at even strength? Do they kill penalties? Are they a shorthanded threat? And who do they play with? Who are they most commonly deployed against? And those types of contextual factors are worth talking about when we're evaluating production, because production is only one component of evaluation, and counting stat production is not infallible. There are plenty of guys who put up empty calorie stats on bad teams. The old trope of good player, bad team stems from experience. It is really easy to put up good counting stats on a bad team because the stakes aren't that real. You can be inefficient. You can shoot the puck however many times you want, because the chances of you winning aren't going to be dramatically influenced by playing particularly aggressively. But in talking about this, the Oilers so far through their first game, there are 6 guys we're going to hit on. We're going to start with Andrew Mangiapane, somebody I have pretty good understanding of his game, where he's at in his NHL career. And I want to see what becomes of Mangiapane, especially his usage, once Zach Hyman returns. I think in the interim, as long as Draisaitl and McDavid are spending a majority of their 5-on-5 minutes together, I think Mangiapane is largely going to be a supporting cast member down the lineup. And someone like Mangiapane's toolbox, where he's a strong skater, he's not blistering fast, but he's got a lot of energy. He's a good forechecker. He's good at winning puck battles. Those traits are going to translate. you could realistically play Andrew Mangiapane anywhere in your lineup. Last year on the Capitals, he was a third and fourth liner. There were points during his tenure in Calgary where he was a second liner. I think if Zach Hyman gets back healthy and the Oilers go back to splitting McDavid and Draisaitl up, there's a good chance we will see Andrew Mangiapane riding shotgun with one of Draisaitl or McDavid. I thought he had a pretty solid first game as an Oiler. I know his line did not play particularly well at 5-on-5. His line last night was actually the line that had the most difficulty. That Savard, Mangiapane, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins line at 5-on-5 definitely had the most struggle. They were in their own zone the most. They conceded a lot of scoring chances against. But I also want to give Mangiapane the benefit of the doubt. I think it's important. And we'll talk about Savoy in a minute because they both played on the same line. And I wanted to talk about them for that reason in this first segment. But something we can take away, and it's not so much about the production. Mangiapane picked up an assist. It's great. All of this is to say, you are trying to evaluate on a sliding scale. When it comes to production, not everyone is going to produce every game. Not everyone's Leon, not everyone's Connor. But for me, my benchmarks are they looking comfortable? Does the game look like they're fighting it? And in Mangiapane's case, his skill set is very translatable. You can deploy it in almost any situation, and he's not really going to look out of place. Now, he has limitations. He's not a real high-end shooter. He's not particularly big. He's not particularly strong. But his motor and his hands aren't bad. That in of itself should give the team a real chance of being interesting with how it uses him. And look, I'm not expecting the world of Mangiapane. He's one of my favorite players, somebody I feel is capable of a lot, actually. But when you think about it, excuse me, and I want to be correct, Mangiapane scored the goal off the McDavid assist. He did not facilitate a goal, not an assist, a goal. But on that point, and talking about being comfortable, I think Mangiapane is at the point in his career, especially with his skill set as a veteran, that you're going to be able to use him wherever, and he's going to look fine. When it comes to Matthew Savoy, I think giving him the responsibility of playing in the top six with Nuge, with Mangiapane, and what is supposed to be a role that can contribute some offense, I think that's really interesting. I think the Oilers putting responsibility on his plate, asking him to kill penalties too, in addition to that, I think that's good. And I talked about this a little bit after the game, talking about David Tomaszek, the idea that he was getting an opportunity and Chris Knobloch wasn't afraid to use him. I think it's a good thing that Savoy is being given the opportunity to figure it out. And look, it's only one game, but the game did look a little fast for him at times. He didn't look the most decisive. And that's the difference between the American and the National. There are good hockey players in the American Hockey League. It is a developmental league where there are guys trying to figure out their skill sets, what they can do, what they can't do. For Savoy, the first month of this season is largely going to be about getting his feet under him, getting used to game speed, and then if he can stick, if he starts to look more comfortable, then it becomes a matter of what can he do. But for right now, it's perfectly reasonable to say, I just want to see Savoy look comfortable. I want to see him start to get his feet under him, start to develop a move or two that he can deploy with some familiarity to create space, to create passing lanes, and then on occasion get off his own shot as well. But that comes down to confidence, and you can't build up that confidence if you don't have your feet under you. So for Savoy, I want to see him ease into this. It is a long, winding road. It's very easy for young guys to get discouraged, but I do think the fact that Savoy has played several seasons in the American Hockey League has him a bit more conditioned to be able to respond to some of these adverse situations he's going to find himself in as this season goes along, just because of the nature of sports. Sports reveal character. It's one of the reasons we have kids play youth sports. They teach you important lessons about life that you're not going to be able to pick up from other types of recreational activities outside of your day-to-day school, whatever, as a kid. We are going to take our first break on today's edition of Locked On Oilers. When we come back, we'll talk about two rookies, and I'm going to tell you why Ike Howard and David Tomaszek, they look the part. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel has an offer you don't want to miss. Because right now, new FanDuel customers can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right. Pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use on the FanDuel app. I love using FanDuel because it makes however I want to play easy. You can put together a same game parlay for a squad ride with your friends. If you're tired of trying to pick the games and you want to ride player props, FanDuel can make it happen. Or if you feel the momentum shifting underfoot and want to bet on the comeback, live betting makes it happen. The NFL slate this weekend, it's okay. There's nothing remarkable. Chargers-Dolphins is a sneaky game that the Dolphins really need, and the Chargers have 2 backup tackles. That's something worth monitoring. The Cardinals at the Colts, where the Colts are 7.5-point favorites. That feels a little bit high. And then, truly great game, 49ers at the Buccaneers, where the Bucs are 3-point favorites at home in Tampa Bay. So FanDuel has just one question. What are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com, download the FanDuel app today for your chance at winning $300 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Thank you so much to everybody who is hanging out on this Friday edition of Locked On Oilers. And as I said on yesterday's show, we will have our normal Monday episode for you to break down the weekend coverage. If you're new around here, if you're not an everydayer, we go Monday through Friday during the season. There are hits for the Locked On NHL Game Night show. We try and get shorts out when breaking news happens, but it's nice to be back in the swing of things. Yes, I'm a little bit tired. Yes, I'm a little bit frustrated. The Oilers went to the 8th round of the shootout the first night of the season to really remind me about the difference in time zones, but there's nothing like that feeling, man. And one of the stories I'm really invested in this year, and something I genuinely find myself caring about, is watching Ike Howard. And I saw the post the Oilers had made on their social feeds. His family, his friends, I think they said 14 people in his party he had to get tickets for his NHL debut last night. And the biggest thing when it comes to these young players, the guys who don't have NHL experience, is confidence. And it's not even necessarily about having the requisite talent. You can get yourself pretty far as a professional athlete if you have confidence in your abilities, because there are a lot of really talented players who will struggle with their confidence from time to time. It's a natural part of the cycle of sports. You're going to go through cold streaks. That's just the way averages over a long period of time work out. But when you're a young player, and I talk about this a lot on the team level, the idea of a team that maybe doesn't have a lot of experience, doesn't understand they're not supposed to be good, kind of playing with nothing to lose. For someone like Howard, who has a pretty nice amateur background at the college level, got the Hobie Baker Award last year at Michigan State, there's a little bit of a moxie to him. There's a little bit of a spunk to his game. The idea that he's going to jump right into the NHL. And look, yeah, he's a little bit older. He played a couple of years of college hockey, so physically he's a little bit more mature, though I do think he's probably going to hit a physical wall at about the 45, 50 game mark just because of the jump from the college hockey season up to the NHL level. But last night, or I should say Wednesday night into Thursday morning, Howard looked like an NHL caliber player. And I know that's not a very high bar, but when we're evaluating guys who don't have track records or very small track records, I just want to see if they fit in. Are they noticeable for bad reasons? Because if they're notable for bad reasons, that's not something you feel great about. But if it's notable because he's making things happen, and I'll be honest, Howard was very decisive. And that is something that I do think young players, especially coming into a really talented team the way the Oilers have, there's a sense of needing to defer to the veterans on your line, to the more experienced players, that I don't want to make a mistake. I'm going to get rid of this puck. Whereas Howard had that puck on his stick and said, okay, sweet, I'm going to rip this. I'm going to get this on net. I'm going to make something happen. And that mentality is going to get him opportunities. Now, there is a world where he shoots himself out of a role because a lot of plays die on his stick. There's not as much synergy. There's not as much link up. But the positive of this, the good side of this, is because he looks the part, at least looks comfortable, is willing to take shots, And I do think that's something the Oilers, frankly, lack. They don't have a lot of guys who profile as shoot-first forwards. They have a lot of distributors. They have a lot of playmakers. They have a lot of creativity. But when it comes to just letting it rip, flying through the hips and getting that puck on net, something like what Howard has is going to be useful. And look, these shoot-first wingers generally have defined ceilings. They don't get as much opportunity, especially early in their careers, because teams are reticent because of the implied defensive responsibility and more opportunity. I think about a lot of the conversations over the years about guys like Nick Zararis, Kyle Connor, who profile as offensive first wingers, who aren't the most physical, who aren't the most defensive oriented, but are very clearly gifted hockey players, but because of the assumed responsibility of playing a more prominent role, that lack of defense does hold you back. So for Howard, getting his feet under him, looking like he's at NHL game speed, having the conviction and the decisiveness to just let that puck fly, that's a good start. It's one game. We'll see how the Oilers choose to handle him. I am curious to see if Chris Knoblauch will continue to let him figure it out as we go, or if there's a real conversation about potentially sending him down to Bakersfield to play 21, 22 minutes per night at the AHL level, though I do think part of the reason he had lobbied the Lightning and ultimately facilitated a trade from Tampa Bay was wanting to get to the NHL level faster. And I think his skill set, though a little limited, he's not the most well-rounded player. What he's good at is something the Oilers need, and that's going to give him a chance to stick around, even if maybe he needs to add more. And then the other rookie, 29-year-old David Tomaszek, who I was impressed how much leeway Chris Knoblauch gave him. He took 2 penalties in last night's game, but he still got opportunities. That did not give him a short leash. I like the fact that he's getting the Zach Hyman role at the net front on the power play. I like the fact he was out there in the 4-on-3 in the overtime period as opposed to Nugent-Hopkins to give the Oilers another right-handed shot. I like the fact he looked comfortable. Now, I think he needs to figure out what he can and can't get away with at the NHL level. I think the game probably moves a smidge faster than it does over in Europe because we play on a smaller ice surface here in North America. But he didn't look out of place. And again, I've said this a few times now because we're talking about guys who don't have a ton of NHL level experience. Don't be notable for bad reasons. If you can fly under the radar, you can string together quietly good performances. And most importantly, in the case of Tomaszek, your coach trusts you, gives you opportunities. That's going to be a path to a runway at the NHL level. That's going to be a path to playing consistent minutes. And does he need to be a little bit better? Are the 2 penalties kind of frustrating? They're lazy to some degree. Yes, of course. But I think the opportunity for an exciting player or somebody that is at least tantalizing is present here. You saw him facilitate the Leon goal, which very nice pass, which came from being in the right place at the right time. And that's all you can ask for from these guys. I can't wait to see how the Oilers choose to use him over the course of the season, if he's going to get to continue riding in the Zach Hyman role until Hyman comes back, or maybe the Oilers want to try a rotation of guys. Maybe they want to experiment a little bit to see who else is capable of handling that role. But I just like having another top 6 forward that's a right-handed shot. I know Tomaszek played a little bit lower in the lineup last night, but I think ultimately when we get to March or April, I think Tomaszek's going to end up being a top 6 forward. And I think Chris Knoblauch giving him this much leeway, this much trust out of the gate bodes well for his NHL trajectory. We're going to take our second and final break on today's show. When we come back, I'm going to tell you why I think Alec Regula might be able to replace Troy Stetcher. No problem. Thank you so much to everybody who is hanging out on this Friday edition of Locked On Oilers, heading into the weekend in style. So when it comes to depth, when it comes to fringe defensemen, fringe forwards, we're talking about the capacity to be plug and play. You need to have the ability, like a baseball bench player, that you're going to go a couple days at a time, maybe a couple weeks at a time, without getting back into the lineup. And that is a really challenging position to be in, because so much of hockey is about rhythms. It's about synergy. It's about connection. And if you can't make that play work with your line mates, with your defensive partner, because you haven't been in the lineup, It's pretty reasonable. I think about how I feel going back to the gym after not working out for a week or so, how sore I am, how difficult it feels to complete certain movements. And that puts things into a proper context. You could go 2 or 3 weeks if you're the 7th defenseman or the 13th forward without drawing in. And the expectation when you draw back in after not playing for weeks at a time is you're going to take warm up and you're going to be able to jump right into it like you haven't missed a beat. And Troy Stetcher is somebody who has filled that role for a good chunk of his career. His skill set as a smaller, puck-moving defenseman, I think maybe bodes a bit better for his archetype than somebody who's a defensive defenseman, which is so much more about being able to read, to make jumps, and to make decisions, where that timing of not being in the lineup for an extended period of time, that's going to weigh on you. That's going to put you in an awkward position to try and get back up to game speed faster. And I thought Alec Regula largely looked the part of an NHL defenseman last night. He was a dart throw from the Ken Holland regime a couple of years ago off of waivers, somebody who skates pretty well, moves the puck pretty well, but doesn't have a whole lot to show for it at the NHL level as far as much of a track record goes. And we're not asking a lot here. He only played 15 minutes last night. This is somebody with 23 NHL career games. He's 25 years old, coming off a pretty serious injury a couple of years ago. But he has, at least in my mind, he has the traits that should give him the capacity to fill in. Now, it raises a very interesting question as far as the Ty Emberson, Alec Regula dichotomy. Jake Wallman being injured, not playing on opening night, makes a bit of an opportunity here. And we'll see. Look, they signed Jake Wallman to a 7-year contract. There's no disputing it. He's staying in the lineup once he's healthy. But I do think there might be a conversation as far as Emberson versus Regula. I think either of those guys, and I thought Emberson was fine on opening night. I think he didn't get as much of a leash last year as I would have liked him to. I thought he was pretty good in the limited role he did play for last year's Oilers. I think Regula, by virtue of being a little bit bigger, a bit heftier, maybe makes the Oilers feel a bit more comfortable. The fact he was playing alongside Darnell Nurse in tougher minutes last night, I think that shows you a bit of trust there. And Regula looked the part. He looked like an NHL defenseman. And again, for like the 8th time this episode, that is not a high bar to clear. But when we are in the early stages of the season, you are on occasion going to see a guy who looks entirely out of his depth. Think about the way Josh Brown looked out of the gate last year, where he did not look like an NHL player. That's what we're talking about when I say noticeable for the wrong reasons. Can you hold your own out there? Can you tread water? And like we say a lot, I use the tread water metaphor a lot on the show because I think it's apt for describing a lot of hockey. In the case of this type of player, the extra defenseman, extra forward, you don't need to swim. Can you tread water long enough for help to come? Because if you're treading water, you're definitely not drowning. But we all know you cannot tread water for indefinite period of time. There are guys who are world-class athletes. There are Navy SEALs who have the specialized training, guys who could tread water for hours at a time. But there does eventually come a point where that lactic acid buildup in your muscles is going to make you unable to tread water any longer, and you're going to need to float. But Regula gives you options. And like we talk about all the time here, and my everydayers have heard me say this for a while now, the more options you have as a coach, as a general manager, the better. If Regula and Emberson both play well, okay, maybe you trade one of them. Maybe you have one of them go to the AHL and play 23, 24 minutes per night. Maybe there's a path to getting actual NHL value out of these guys. And you put these two in direct competition with each other, which is something I am a big proponent of. You heard me talking about that in the offseason leading up to the year as far as Stetcher versus Emberson. I don't like it when teams put two people in a competition with each other, but there's not a serious competition. It is academic. There is an implied assumption based on who one of the two people is, who's going to win the contest, who's going to win the job. I genuinely like it when two guys are put to the test. They go out there in training camp, they go out there in the preseason, and then based on the results, based on how they perform, they are given respective leashes to pull on to work on there. I thought Regula played a really solid game last night, and Darnell Nurse is a challenging partner to play with. He makes a lot of decisions that are erratic, that are aggressive, and it puts you in a difficult position. But Regula, by and large, looked the part as far as his skating, being in the right place at the right time. I think there's probably a bit of work to do as far as just comfortability at the NHL level, being that he only has 23 career games. But I thought for a first game with a team that has high expectations, he didn't stick out like a sore thumb. And that lastly brings us to Noah Philp, who I thought was fine. And we're not talking about a particularly important role. We're talking about a fourth line center. We're talking about somebody who played, I want to get this right, all of 11 minutes last night. But all you're asking for your fourth line is to not lose you the game. Your ideal fourth line is going to get pucks in deep. They're going to forecheck. They're going to cycle. They're going to waste time. They're going to tire out the defense. They're going to tire out the goalie. They're going to win board battles. And Noah Philp has the capacity to do that. I would like to see Noah Philp find ways to make himself more functional. And that's forechecking. That's throwing hits. That is winning faceoffs. And we're not talking about asking a lot here. I am happy that he's going to get an opportunity to try and play his way into a role here. I'll be curious to see what the runway, what the management decisions are as far as the depth goes here, especially when you figure out what you're going to do with Janmark. If you want to give Curtis Lazar a look as well, which is something I'm kind of surprised he didn't get in. But at the same time, like I had said before, I am happy they are at least willing to entertain the idea that this could be Noah Philp's job in the long term. I think there's a world where once Janmark is healthy, you try and trade him to get that extra cap space, because $500,000-$600,000 doesn't seem like a huge difference, but getting that extra space now might make a difference down the road. Your fourth line center is an unglamorous job. You are not going to put up stats. You are going to get hit a lot. You're going to be tasked with winning important faceoffs. You are going to get unfavorable matchups, especially on the road where the other team's going to have last change. They're going to see you out there and send their best players over the wall to try and take advantage of the fact that your fourth line is out there. But I think there is enough there that I can at least talk myself into Noah Philp in that role for at least the short term. I do think they could stand to add another center to this group. Maybe David Tomashek moves back to the middle. Henrique gets kicked out to the wing. Like we said before, it's good to have options. And Noah Philp, it probably isn't the highest of ceilings guy, but he is a viable option, at least for now. That will do it for today's edition of Locked On Oilers. Be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts or over on YouTube. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, please leave the show a 5-star review. I will talk to you guys on Monday. Be sure to check out Locked On NHL and Locked On NHL Game Night. Everyone have a safe and fun weekend. Until Monday, let's go Oilers.